Hi everyone, and welcome to today's webinar. I'm Amy Moore from TRYBE, and I'm our Head of Marketing and Partnerships. And what TRYBE does is we are an operational software for the spa, leisure and activities industry. Today I am joined by Dr. Rik Van Leeuwen, who is the VP of Customer Operations at Irecknu. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you for having me.
Now, for those who maybe don't know who Irecknu is, can you just give us a brief introduction into who you are and the business?
Yeah, definitely. Irecknu is a middleware layer and CDP, a customer data platform. So we started around 12 years ago by solving the connectivity problem basically within hospitality to ensure that messages from either on-prem systems or between cloud systems are flowing. And in like the recent 5 years, we actually built our customer data platform on top of that, since we already had all reservations related data and also profile related data. So yeah, we are really sitting in the middle of an IT infrastructure basically, and to orchestrate all messages that are flowing through this landscape.
Yeah, for sure. Thank you so much for that. So let's just go right into it and kind of talk about why an integrated tech stack is important, kind of stripping it right back to basics. But for you and the team, kind of why is it important for tech to integrate, and why is it better to move towards like the best in breed systems instead of a legacy all in one?
Mhm. There are, of course, several reasons why you would like to have a best of breed kind of infrastructure. I think one of the most important things that we have to consider is that we want to build a relationship with the guest. That should be on top and on front, basically, on what we're trying to do. And to get to know someone a little bit better, you try to understand certain pieces, right? And therefore, one of these pieces is, for example, staying in the hotel or having a spa treatment or having certain preferences and these kind of things. And because you are breaking down these silos and create a profile with all these connected data points, you can get to know each other a little bit better also if one is traveling from one property to another. And therefore, if we have a tech stack that is able to share this data quite easily, or you can tap into it via APIs, for example, you slowly and steadily gain control over what data should flow to what system and when as well. And that's quite important, basically, why we need to have this integrated tech stack.
Yeah, it's so important. And it then one enhances the guest journey and the guest experience, but then it just makes things so much more seamless across the board, whether you're customer facing, whether you are the customer, whatever department you're in, it's hugely important. And I reckon you have an amazing stat that kind of says 20% of guest interactions happen outside of the PMS. And that really obviously impacts why the ancillary services that hotels have aren't an afterthought anymore. They need to be fully integrated in the softwares that they're using.
Yes, definitely, right? It's also part of your stay, and you can really enhance the experience that people have on site if you can either know if someone is indeed a huge fan of having sport massages, for example, and if that's happening at your London property, but maybe as well in your New York property, you can actually transfer these kind of preferences. But even if you only, between quotations, have one spa, basically, you still want to know if this person also stayed in the hotel, for example, and if preferences basically are getting tied to the right profile and not duplicates are being created as well, which also cause already maybe the first interaction point if we are talking about that. Instead of saying, hey, welcome back, people are asking, is this your first time actually getting a treatment here? We can already know this up front, right? And therefore be reliant on the data points to drive this experience can really help to create consistency in your customer journey, for example.
Yeah, and that's like such an important part. Guests are getting personalized messaging across, whether it is your hotel stay, whether it's your streaming services that you're using, like what dinner you're going to, like absolutely everything is personalized. And so if the hospitality industry is falling behind on that, it's really noticed and impacted when you are a repeat guest or you've been there multiple times and someone's like, oh, welcome, nice to have you. It makes such a difference. And that unpersonalized aspect that comes from not having integrated tech is a massive revenue limiter to businesses.
Yes, definitely. Um, what we are then doing as a whole industry is we are looking at every treatment, for example, or every stay as a transaction based instead of a relation based point of view, right? So you want to build up this relationship, as I mentioned already earlier, and indeed recognizing the guest is really important indeed, and especially if you're talking a little bit more around the luxury segment within the hospitality, people are expecting to be recognized as well. But it also means that if you are reliant on a tech stack that, for example, luxury hotel chains are actually doing, it also needs to be accessible to some extent towards like the mid segment, for example, and to also be able to actually recognize if someone is a returning guest, yes or no. This should be really the bare minimum almost to understand if this is a returning guest, yes or no.
Yeah, for sure. And then obviously those returning guests massively help hit revenue and budgets for teams. I know that loads of events that I've kind of been to over the past year, maybe longer, everyone talks about how are they going to hit budget because their budgets are they have budgets to hit, however costs are increasing, whether that's from a team perspective or from an operational perspective. We know costs are really rising. And so these integrated tech stacks where you can personalize and upsell make such a difference. What would you kind of say to anyone who is hesitant behind this integration part to help personalize it? What would you say to people who are hesitant about that?
I think the most important thing, if you really want to bring in tech towards your IT landscape, is you need to understand for a large part, and this understanding can be gained from the people who are working on site, for example, is how much revenue as well your repeat guests are actually bringing in, right? So and with that, I've actually seen with a couple of our clients that sometimes 10% of your guests bring in 20 to 25% of your revenue,
Oh,
right?
wow.
And if you can enlarge this 10%, right, with 1 or 2% towards 12, that almost be doubled in terms of revenue that you totally gain eventually, right? Then you go towards 30%. And since we understand who this guest is, and since you already have this data, if you can enrich it, for example, by making the right decisions in your tech stack, you can really tap into this 10% and try to enlarge it. Maybe some of the other 90% of your guests that are then maybe deemed to actually be your first time guests, if you can really understand if they are actually maybe due to duplicates are, for example, your recurring guests, then you can really ensure that with the right systems and with the right personalization, you can boost that, even though your budgeting basically is under quite some pressure to actually have that met. And by not always stepping in towards a new guest that needs to come towards your hotel, we can definitely make use of all the data points that we maybe currently already collected of a guest to convert them towards a recurring guest. And that's so important here, that we shouldn't be so hesitant basically in making or introducing a new system into your IT landscape, but it needs to fit in to your overall data strategy and your roadmap where you want to be in 5 years.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. It's bringing in tech at a time that works for you and the tech that works, not just a new system for system's sake or because your IT director has recommended it. You need things that are actually going to work for the people that are using those systems on a daily basis.
Yes, and as well as we already talked about a little bit earlier, right? These systems need to be API driven, for example, and not indeed be a system that will potentially create another silo that you are so desperately try to break down. And you need to be able to tap into this data quite easily. There
Yeah,
should not be going, I don't know, like a timeline of 2 months or 3 months to get access to your own data, basically. I think that should be a very valid question if you are talking with a new vendor, for example, is how fast can I get access to my data, for example, and what is all available? Maybe
Yeah.
not everything is available at day one, but yeah, at least you need to be able to interact with it and potentially build your own workflows, or the other vendors that you're working with need to tap in that they are actually able to enrich their own workflows in terms indeed of a pre-arrival email. And we have certain treatments or certain restaurant reservations that are already added towards the reservation. And if you are unable to tap into that, you send out a pre-arrival email and say, hey, please book your restaurant or book your spa treatment. Then this guest is like, yeah, but how is this even possible? I booked everything on basically at your property, and you're still unable to give me, I don't know, a good recommendation of what I should do more towards it. While this guest is potentially really willing to spend potentially some more money during their stay. So there is indeed this huge opportunity for recognition, where systems basically need to support that recognition of an individual.
Yeah, totally. And when personalization isn't done, or when it's done in a bad way, it puts people off and they're actually probably more likely to spend less than the intention of what your original email was in the first place. And we've seen through TRYBE, just by like effective personalization and upselling, the average value is £266. And that's just through our system exclusively. So actually, if you look at the entire ecosystem that you're using, if they're working well together, it then goes back to what you were saying about how you can go from 10% to 12%, and just those small increases make such a big difference to revenue, to budgets, and what everyone in the hospitality industry wants is the guest experience.
Yeah, exactly. And it's indeed that you are trying to break down these silos, right? So indeed, like TRYBE has a very good understanding eventually in how much guests are indeed spending in the spa. But if you're looking at it from an overarching perspective, that if you are unable to get this data out or some way, or where you can crunch the numbers, and there was also maybe a hotel reservation and a survey associated to it, and you want to send out a marketing campaign to get this guest back, and you look at the survey and maybe the spa treatment, I don't know, was not as good as expected, for example, then you shouldn't, with your first email communication with this guest, you shouldn't say, hey, let's book you a new spa treatment, for example. But you need to reach out towards this guest, and maybe even by front office, for example, that does a follow-up, right? And therefore, these, what looks like a very logical follow-up email because you marked someone as a spa lover, we need to tap into as well the survey results to really understand the guest and build this relationship. Otherwise, you miss these important details, right?
Yeah.
Imagine you are talking with a friend telling you a whole story, and in the end you said, oh yeah, that's actually quite nice, while maybe half of the story was quite sad. Because then you haven't listened to a part of it, and because you even though you respond, doesn't necessarily mean that it is well perceived on the other end, right? So, and therefore it is so important that you have these systems that you can be connected to, basically, and you are able to stitch basically these data points into a customer journey where you can make the right decisions. If this happened, if this train of actions happened, we want to do that. Instead of spa treatment, we do this. I think this is way more complex a stay on its own if you really want to do personalization in the right way, because otherwise it will be just regular marketing. You have a huge group pool of guests, and you are unfortunately then associated towards that group of guests, and you get this blast email that will have an effect, but there is so much more to gain, basically.
Yeah, for sure. And this leads us nicely on to kind of talking around how you can reduce admin through automation. But actually, if it's done wrong, you're then increasing a workload for a team, or you're impacting your revenue through poor communications and poor personalization. So we know that like automation streamlines the workflow, whether it's your hotel, whether it's your F&B, whether it's your guest comms, across the whole ecosystem. It massively helps to enhance and streamline it. But teams are stretched and they might think, oh, well, if we bring on more tech or we kind of integrate a few things, this is then going to create more work through horror stories potentially of poor automation. How would you kind of combat that if you were talking to a hotelier about this?
Yeah, eventually the data needs to flow correctly from one system to another, right? So if, for example, there are notes, for example, being written into the restaurant or towards the spa, it needs to travel eventually as well towards the PMS in the end, because that's also where front desk agents are basically staying there on a daily basis, receiving guests. And if you have no idea what happened on another part of the venue actually, or on the on site, then you basically miss this. Or if you are not following up properly, then you can actually maybe expect even calls from the guest and saying, yeah, listen, I actually was expecting a follow-up around this. So indeed, if this automation is not set up as expected, or it fails to move this data basically from one system to another, or to be able to consolidate it, indeed, then you can really expect more work in the end for teams that are already under pressure basically to still serve the guest and to try to build this relationship, right, that we already talked about a couple times.
Yeah, and I think everyone will say that when they go somewhere, it's nice for them to not have to re-explain, oh, I've got an allergy, oh, I prefer this scent, oh, I'm not allowed this. Like, there are so many things that even if you're a repeat guest, you don't have to explain it. But then actually in one stay at a hotel, you don't want to be talking to the restaurant, the hotel reception, the spa, the activity center about the same thing multiple times.
Yeah, indeed. And some of these nuances, right, you also need to have some kind of operational procedures around it. So we often have talks with our clients around preferences, which is like always a very relevant topic for every hotel chain that we are talking to. Some of these preferences, if we are definitely talking about dietary restrictions, for example, some of them are non-negotiable almost, and saying like peanut allergy or these kind of things, right, that are extremely serious, that and that you need to handle with care. Other things, alcohol free, for example, it can be the case that maybe during dry January I am not drinking for a month, right? So, and therefore maybe in February, yeah, if you are then not offering me this or that, for example, and you are offering me like a mocktail, and I'm like, yeah, actually I want to have a cocktail, right? So sometimes these preferences are temporarily, right? And sometimes you can also gauge that a little bit with the guest actually by having this interaction. And some of them are really permanent and need to travel from one property to another. And others need to stay local, for example. So and that's why indeed we need to ensure that things are traveling, or like if we're, and with things I mean like these preferences or these notes or data consents. We haven't even touched upon that whole topic basically, but all those data points that are so important for a guest to really understand who they are and to build a relationship upon, basically they need to travel from one system to another, and you need to be able then to create this holistic view of the guest in the end.
Yeah, for sure. We're all human, we're all complex. One day you want something and then the next week you probably don't.
Yeah,
So
it
it's super
changes.
important.
Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that flexibility piece around it is also super important for everyone to remember, whether you're like a hospitality industry, whether you're the guest, on all parts.
Indeed, yes, indeed, and this change basically of, just if we were right now talking about a single guest, this also happens on your entire customer base. Your guest from 15 years ago is not the guest that is coming to your hotel today. So you also need to build basically your ecosystem to some extent, that you are able to move along either with your customer base, or you need to move towards a new part of hotel guests or other type of guests that you were not tapping into before, but right now they are coming towards your hotel. And that's so important that you, to some extent, are taking into account with the strategy that you're taking, that you need to be a little bit agile. For every 5 years, you need to make some kind of change to keep up as well with the whole digitalization and as well the expectations of the guest. Probably our parents were expecting something completely different from a hotel stay than we are right now traveling. I'm not even caring if I have a TV with 100 channels on my room, but I just want to tap into, for example, HBO and Netflix via on my own phone because I want to just continue watching what I was already doing. So I actually want to cast towards the TV.
Yeah.
So, and these changes basically, and tapping into that, and that's extremely important.
No, I totally agree. Like my mum loves phoning up and making a booking over the phone, whereas I'm like, if I can't make it online, I will not book with someone. Like the booking behaviors are so different from 10, 15, even last year, booking behaviors are so different. And that brings us nicely onto the fact that the hospitality industry is so human focused. And that's something that's amazing about the industry we work in. You know, technology should enable things to be more personal and not less human. What would you kind of say if anyone has any hesitations around, well, tech stack is replacing humans? What would you say to that when actually, when we work in tech, we know that it's there to enhance the humans working behind the scenes to enhance the experience on site?
Yeah, eventually we are not having a internet experience, right? We are having an on-site, we are traveling, we are going somewhere experience basically, and therefore tech is unable to replace what the people on site are doing. Like this will never change basically. However, we do need to recognize indeed that the needs that we just talked about are changing and we expect to be recognized, especially indeed where maybe staff is turning over more quickly right now compared to 15 or 20 years ago. Eventually what stays is the data of the guest on how you can actually serve them, right? And that is, I think, the key here in ensuring that you can still basically serve in a consistent manner over a longer period of time the brand identity that you have set up basically, and that's so important indeed.
No, 100%. And the technology is there to kind of manage the process and the platforms behind, whereas people and your team are there to deliver the experience. And I think that's such an important distinction for managers, for hoteliers to kind of remember when they are looking at integrating more tech or bringing on new softwares.
Indeed. And sometimes indeed, right, really tech can help to really bring this personalized touch, for example, because you are making certain data points available in certain touch points, but it's still the human who is setting it up, but you are just delivering on a higher level basically the personalized experience. If we are talking about maybe the whole digitalization about a pre-arrival note, for example, maybe indeed like 40 or 50 years ago, maybe the high-end hotels were actually sending a letter towards your house and saying, okay, this is the overview of your stay. We actually really like that you are actually coming. Right now, of course, it changed into like a booking confirmation or an email eventually. And marketing is right now also done via email mostly, and still in some parts of the world they're very keen actually on physical mail, but that is also slowly and steadily changing. And if we are able to understand indeed if the technology is helping the process, it's also helping the people. And it needs to be in a balance, right? It's like this three-legged stool almost that we were talking about, where people, I think, will never be replaced in hospitality. But if the technology is too advanced or too far from the process and the people, you create this disbalance in this stool, right? So, and therefore it needs to grow almost in the same pace. And sometimes you hit even like that technology is growing faster, and you're actually talking not more from a technology point of view of a problem, but more towards change management within your organization, that you actually need to make a difference to rise basically the level of this tool in that sense. So, but for the process point of view, indeed, if we were talking about a pre-arrival email, indeed, like maybe you can easily say with your pre-arrival email, like you can create 2 buttons saying if you are more in the mood for a sporty getaway or a relaxed getaway. I'm just saying something right now. It can be very easily in a pre-arrival email, and if you tick then the sports, it would change the way that you are being greeted, for example, in the moment that you are entering basically the property. Because there is some kind of preference then associated to it. And if you've done this maybe 2 or 3 times, right, then again, the people still need to execute it, right? And that's the point that I'm trying to make here. But if you're then staying maybe 4 times afterwards still at the same property, and afterwards it's always a relaxed getaway that you're looking for, then you do not want to be greeted like super sporty. I'm just saying something right now, huh? But that's indeed where technology is able to help basically to personalize this experience every time that you are staying. And because the purpose of a stay can also be different every time, it doesn't necessarily need to be always that equal in that sense. And then we are talking indeed about the different needs that there are also of a certain guest, but also over your entire active customer base. And that's why it's so important to gauge basically how technology can help the people, and eventually as well the process that is happening.
Yeah, for sure. Like when your systems and your data and your team are aligned, that's when you can really, like humans can really experience the hotel, and then hospitality industries and venues can do it at scale as opposed to a more one-on-one time consuming experience. So yeah, I like totally agree with all of that. And I think that's just a really nice place for us to end on. But before I let you go, if you were to ask the viewers to kind of take one key thing away from our discussion, what would it be?
Try to strengthen your customer journey really from start to finish, and the differences that there are and the nuances, and how you're going to make different decisions based on the data points that you are either collecting before or after that point in time in your customer journey.
Yeah, perfect. Thank you so much. And if anyone wants to get in contact with you, or they want to get in contact with the team, where should we send them?
You can definitely go to our website, which is Irecknu.com. And definitely, if you fill out the form there, if you want to have some contact, then we can guide you to the right people within Irecknu.
Perfect. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.